My name is Dr. Know-It-All, and welcome to the Science Channel. This is the part of television where you ask and we answer. Lachlan, a student from Brisbane, and his Year 6 classmates have been studying the physical conditions within habitats and how living things are affected when these conditions change. He's written in and would like to know more about deforestation. Let's jump into it. Ever seen a massive forest beaming with life, birds flying from tree to tree, cicadas buzzing during the afternoon, and the rustling of leaves as an animal makes its way through the scrub? Whilst that's a pretty picture to imagine, and it probably looks something like what's behind me right now, the existence of these forests and the protection of their ecological makeup is incredibly important to life as we know it. For Mother Nature, forests hold over 80% of terrestrial biodiversity. If we were to threaten our forests, say through clearing down all these trees, we don't just risk the trees themselves, we risk the entire ecosystem within that forest. For humans, the biggest impact of such habitat loss is on our climate. After our oceans, forests are the largest storehouses of carbon. The clearing of our forests releases this carbon into the atmosphere, accentuating the effects of global warming. Let's cross to Matt, our reporter on the ground, who's got a little bit more information.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Dr. Know-It-All. I'm currently standing in what is one of the last natural habitats in the beautiful city of Brisbane. It's places such as these that are our last defence from deforestation due to the influx of land clearing in recent years.
Recently, the Australian Conservation Foundation reported that 323,676 hectares of forest was cleared in Queensland in 2022. Try and understand the size of that. If you're having trouble, you're not alone. It would be like clearing not one, not three, but 6 Brisbane CBDs every single day. That amount of forest would have held the equivalent to 58,261,680 tonnes of CO2 that has now been released into the atmosphere.
Let's pause for a second. If the level of clearing is happening like this at a state level, what about the rest of the world? Well, the picture gets pretty bleak. Whilst the rest of the world might not look like the beautiful forest that I'm walking through now, let's have a look at the Amazon, a location that is often referred to as Earth's first lung due to the amount of carbon it absorbs. It's a rainforest that is of similar size to the continental United States. According to the WWF, the Amazon has wholly lost over 17% of its forest, and an additional 17% are severely degraded. Turning our attention to Earth's second lungs, the Congo Basin, and we see similar devastating trends. Between 2000 and 2014, an area of the forest larger than Bangladesh was destroyed. Between 2015 and 2019, similar clearing occurred, with over 6 million of hectares of tree cover being reduced to nothing. Experts have predicted that if nothing is done to fix these alarming rates of deforestation, then all primary forest in the Congo Basin will be gone by the end of the century. So it begs to ask, can we fix this? And if so, how?
You might be thinking, why don't we just plant more trees then? Surely growing new forests would suck up all the CO2 emissions we release by cutting the forest down. I asked these questions to Professor Charles Harvey of MIT, and here's what he had to say. Planting trees where they've been lost is often a good idea, and that will take up CO2, Harvey says. But a much more efficient thing to do, to have a larger effect for the same effort, is to stop cutting down trees. It's almost silly to think about planting a huge number of new trees while we're just burning and destroying them everywhere, releasing carbon at rates that are much higher than what that new growth would take up.
So let's recap what we know so far. Clearing natural forests is called deforestation. When we cut down trees, CO2 emissions are released. The more CO2 emissions that are released, the quicker global warming occurs. Whilst that sounds bad enough, what about habitat loss? To understand this better, we wanted to look at our beloved koala pair and the effect that deforestation has had on this animal. One of our reporters sat down with koala and deforestation expert Dr. Eugene Koala Man. We'll cross to that interview now.
We're here with our koala expert, Dr. Eugene Koala Man. Dr. Eugene has spent years and years out studying koalas and their habitats, and he can provide us with some great insight as to how habitat loss has affected one of our country's most famous animals. Thank you for having me. We have been discussing deforestation. We have talked about how when we cut down trees, they release CO2. But we miss one of the biggest effects. What does it do to our animals? What is the relation between deforestation and our koalas? How have they been affected? And has this been going on a long time, or is this more of a recent thing? Wonderful question. Australia, since European settlement, has undergone mass landscape modifications, resulting in irreversible changes to local habitats. This means that deforestation has caused koalas' homes and food sources to become very scarce and limited, resulting in a rapid decline of their population. As for habitat loss, it can be dated back as far as 1788, as more and more areas become towns, cities, roads, and even mines, all of which destroy the habitats koalas rely on. This urbanisation causes koalas to move through the cities and towns when they have to cross roads and move through backyards, in which could contain dogs who attack koalas, or pools in which they could drown. In more recent years, koalas have gone from vulnerable to endangered due to the destruction of their habitat. Wow, that is a long time that deforestation has been happening. It is really sad that people's pools and dogs also affect the koalas' populations. So when discussing just deforestation, is there certain areas that the koalas have lost their habitat? Or is it across Australia that has happened? Yes, if you take a look at this map, known as Bob's map, it paints a pretty clear picture of the scale of deforestation and habitat destruction that has taken place. The brown, both dark and light, represents the habitat loss, and the green represents the amount of habitat left. If you look very closely at Queensland, the lowest amount of habitat remaining is actually Brisbane, with only 1.6% of the koala's habitat remaining and about 10 to 15 koalas living in that remaining habitat. That is a very sad but interesting map. I think that is a great way of showing people how badly koalas have been affected. But is there anything that we as a country are doing to change or improve this? Surely there are some laws in place now. We are actually starting to apply regulations that limit or even prohibit the clearing of koala habitats. The threat to koalas has exposed the dangers of deforestation and the need to maintain stability, otherwise we will lose so many fantastic Australian animals. This has been a very interesting interview, and I hope our viewers have taken away lots of facts with them. Thank you, Dr. Eugene, for coming on the show. Thank you for having me. Back to the studio.
So Lachlan, I hope we've been able to shed a little light on deforestation for you and your class. We now know what deforestation is and why it is so harmful when it occurs at the alarming rates it has been. We've covered off the detrimental effects it can have on our climate, as well as the effects it may have on our animals. Specifically, we looked at deforestation and how it is hurting one of our most precious Australian animals, the incredibly adorable koala. We learned from Dr. Eugene Koala Man that Brisbane has only a small fraction of koala habitats remaining. Now, we understand that your class is learning all about animal adaptations when their environments change. And because of this, we wanted to ask you a question. Do you think koalas can adapt to life without forests? And if they can, how do you think they will change? We look forward to hearing your response.